Thank you for joining us for the drone supply chain grand siege from initial breaches to long-term espionage on high-value targets. And it is my privilege to introduce our speakers today. It's Vicky Su, Senior Threat Researcher at Trend Micro, and Philip Chen, Threat Researcher with Trend Micro. So please join me in welcoming Vicky and Philip to the stage.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Philip, and I know looks a little bit funny, but welcome to the Black Hat Asian Show. Thank you. So, you guys must be thinking, what's going on here? Okay, so please don't check your apps, and please don't open the door. Okay, we're the real presentation and all about the research. Okay, so now begin. So, today we're going to share our recent research, the drone supply chain's grand siege, from initial breaches to long-term espionage on high-value targets. So this work includes 3 contributors, me, Philip Chen, and Vicky Su, and Pierre Lee. So before we move into the main part of the research, please let me introduce ourselves. So I'm a comedian. Oh, no, I'm Philip. Okay, so this is Vicky Su, and one another main contributor, Pierre Lee, is not here today. So we're extremely appreciate to Black Hat Asia for giving us a chance to share our research to you guys today. And I'm now working as a junior threat researcher for my 2nd year career, while Vicky and Pierre, they got more than 7 years working experience in threat research. So we're now doing security stuff in Trend Micro, and we're kind of like a ninja team. I'm Naruto and Sasuke-kun and Sakura-chan. Okay, so we're a team saving people's life away from the cyber threat. So for the outline of today, we divided into 6 chapters: background and introduction and campaign analysis, malware analysis, and attribution, and last but not least, takeaway. So hope you guys enjoying this talk, and let's get started. So first of all, let's talk about the background story, like how do we start the research and what coincidence we found during the research. So all the story begins with a recent event. The supply chain of the drone industry is now on the rise. And at the same time, several companies from Taiwan reported a series of cybersecurity incidents. So we observed that our victimized companies are highly overlapped with those mentioned in the news report. And we traced back to the drone supply chain. And we found that all the victimized companies are linked to the same upstream service provider. So we assumed that could be a supply chain attack. And therefore, we started our research. So let's talk about why the drone industry is important nowadays. So for the aspect of military and security applications, drones offer valuable support in defense, surveillance, and disaster response, and enhancing safety and operational efficiency. And also, for the alliance formation, there's a 50-member Taiwanese drone supply chain alliance launched, and they're aiming for the international markets and backed by the government. So by 2028, the alliance targets monthly production of 15,000 drones and an industrial output of NT 30 billion. So we can easily know that the drone industry usually got a deep connection with the government, and it is a super valuable target to the attacker. So for the talk of today, we'll mainly focus on the campaign VENOM and the campaign TIDRONE. So I'll try to explain it in the sequence we're doing the research, and then I'll explain the whole timeline by the end of this chapter. Okay, sorry. At the initial investigation, we observed the campaign TIDRONE first, and then follow with the campaign VENOM. So for the campaign TIDRONE, we observed that the victimology mainly based in Taiwan and South Korea. And the compromised companies includes the satellite vendors, drone vendors, and military-related vendors, and some payment services. So as we can see in this figure, most of the vendors are highly related to the military and the drone industry. So at the initial stage, we assume that the whole operation might target the drone industry, and then we go with the investigation. So let's talk about the arsenal of campaign TIDRONE. So it used lots of customized tools like CX client and client end and screen cap. So for this type of malwares, we'll introduce these malwares in the later part. And after we investigated the campaign TIDRONE, and we found that the compromised company in campaign TIDRONE are using the same ERP software. So as we contact to the ARP vendor, we indeed found some interesting things and gathered them into the campaign VENOM. So for campaign VENOM's victimology, it includes some heavy industry, media industry, technology industry, software service provider, and also healthcare industry. And for the arsenal of campaign VENOM, we observed that the campaign VENOM used lots of open source tools instead of their own customized tools to hide their footprint. So this could be a very strong characteristic to do the attribution to the attacker. And for the campaign VENOM, there's only one customized tool called VenFRPC, and we'll introduce this malware in the later part as well. So after we briefly introduce the campaign TIDRONE and the campaign VENOM, let's discuss the whole picture from the attacker's aspect, like how do they think about the penetration and how to apply the supply chain attack. So let's discuss about the supply chain attack implementation from the attacker's aspect. So the classic supply chain attack usually goes with the malicious code injection or replace the malicious version with the update program to compromise the downstream customer. So this kind of supply chain attack, we call it classic supply chain attack. But however, what if there's no way to do the malicious code injection or replace the update program? So in this way, the attacker might penetrate or do a lateral movement by a trusted channel, like using some monitoring or remote management tool to distribute the malwares to the downstream customers. So this kind of supply chain attack, we call it general supply chain attack. In this case, in the case of campaign VENOM and the campaign TIDRONE, we observed both of two kinds of supply chain attack. So from this case, we can know that we have to be more careful to the different angles to prevent the supply chain attacks. And next, for the attacker's aspect, let's see the whole picture from the timeline of the campaign TIDRONE and the campaign VENOM, done by the intrusion set Earth Ammit. So please look at the orange blocks first. The orange blocks are attributed to the campaign VENOM, and during 2023 to 2024, the campaign VENOM started to compromise some service provider and technology industry based in Taiwan, and also compromise the heavy industry based in South Korea. So Earth Ammit aims to compromise the upstream of the drone supply chain, and once they get control of the upstream providers, and they can be more easily compromise the downstream customers and connect them into the huge impact to the world. So now please look at the blue blocks on the right-hand side. So the blue blocks are attributed to the campaign TIDRONE. And during 2024, the campaign TIDRONE targeted some payment services, some satellite industry and military industry based in Taiwan through the upstream supply chain. And we also observed the whole campaign. It could be traced back to 2022 for the earliest case that some unknown victim and community from Korea and Canada submitted the samples to the virus total. So the whole picture done by Earth Ammit is really carefully planned. And this is how important of this kind of supply chain attack affected the drone supply chain by this case. Okay, next. So how do we connect the campaign VENOM with the campaign TIDRONE? So based on two strong points. First, as I just mentioned, there are some same victims and the service providers under the two campaigns. And second, we observed that there are some C2 overlap. So as we can see in this figure, there's a C2 domain named @everyday.life, right? So we can know that the life being ABT is really tough and tedious, and even the strongest hackers, they own lots of C2 servers and valuable systems, but they can own the latest hard. Okay. So anyway, this is how we connect the campaign Venom with the campaign TIDRONE based on the same victims and the overlap C2. So in the next part, I'm going to introduce the infection chain of campaign Venom and the campaign TIDRONE. So let's get into the campaign Venom first. We divided the infection chain into 3 parts. First, the initial access part. The attacker exploited the vulnerability of web server and planted the web shells into it. So in this part, there's nothing special, but a very common way to get into the servers. And once they get control of the server, they started to move into the command and control part. So in this part, they used open source proxy tools and some open source rat to gain the persistence. And as I just mentioned before, the attacker prefers to use lots of open source tools instead of their own malware to hide their footprint, which is a very strong characteristic to do the attribution to the attacker. And next, once they gain the persistence in the victim's machine, they started to steal the credential from the environment. So for this part, they try to steal NTDS data from victims, and the NTDS data is used to compromise the next stage, which represents the downstream customer, aka campaign TIDRONE. Okay, so the figure on the right-hand side shows the real NTDS data stolen by the attacker, and we hide the sensitive data from this figure, so it's not your problem if you can recognize them. So after explaining the campaign Venom, let's get into the campaign TIDRONE. And we also divided the infection chain into 3 parts. So first, we could imagine the initial access part as campaign Venom. And the attacker targets service provider and do the malicious code injection and distributes the malware via a trusted channel to the downstream customer in the case of campaign Venom. So this whole campaign is recognized as the initial access to campaign TIDRONE. And next, the attacker used their own malware called CX client and client end for the command and control part. So different from the campaign Venom, they started to use the customized tool in this operation. And besides, there are 2 versions of their backdoor. First, the version A of backdoor, we call it CX client. And the loader depends on 2 files, one for a payload file and one for a config file. While version B of backdoor, we call it client end. And the loader depends on only 1 file, the payload file, with embedded config inside of the payload. So this kind of variation might decrease the detection of suspicious file as we thought. So for the post-exploitation part, we observed the behaviors in this part by remote shell capability inside of client end. So the behaviors include privileged escalation skills and collecting information, persistence, disabling AV softwares, credential dumping, and installing and running the customized tool. So for the privilege escalation part, we observed that the attacker applied some UAC bypassing skills, and also they tried to restart with a privilege token. And for the persistence part, we observed that the attacker ran a scheduled task and replaced the legitimate executable in a selected directory with a malicious version. And for the credential dumping part, we observed that the attacker did a process dump for lsas.exe, and also they tried to use cmdkey.exe and minicut to do the credential dumping. And for the collecting part and stolen part, we observed that the attacker used their own malware called stringcap and disguised as man.exe to steal the screenshot from the victim. So it is a screenshot tool downloaded and installed by client Yan via remote shell capability. So for the disabling part, we observed that the attacker tried to use an AV EDR killer called TrueSight Killer. So TrueSight Killer is a tool designed to terminate some antivirus and EDR processes. And it allows attackers or red teamers to bypass security measures and disable the targeted processes. So that's all the infection chain explanation about the campaign Venom and the campaign TIDRONE. And we just explained lots of access points and persistent points from different angles. And next, I'll transfer it to Vicky, and she'll help us to explain the rest part of the research. And thank you.
And in the following chapter, I'd like to walk you through the malwares we found during our investigation. And let's get started. So the first tool I'd like to introduce is VenFRPC, and it's used in a campaign Venom. And before jumping into it directly, I'd like to briefly talk about what FRP is. And FRP is short for phase reverse proxy, and it makes internal service behind a NAT or firewall accessible from the internet through a domain name. And it can establish a secure connection between FRPC and FRPCS to forward requests. So actually, FRPC is just a modified version of FRPC and only slightly different from what we usually see on GitHub. And the configuration is directly embedded in the file itself. And from this configuration format, we can see that the attacker tend to use the victim's identification details to make them easier to recognize their targets. And as shown in the figure at the bottom, actually this GitHub repository belongs to the attacker and is used to host VenFRPC, and each VenFRPC has its own configuration, and that means that different targets. And in the second wave of attacks, which is campaign TIDRONE, we found the same loader can load two different kinds of payloads, and which are Backdoor CS client and client. And note that this illustration here is not exactly the same what we usually see in the malwares. So they could be multiple layers of loadings. But to simplify the explanation, we only keep one layer. So next page, I'm going to introduce the loader. So after analyzing different versions of loaders, we can observe here is the evolution within these years. So in 2023, the attackers started to use fiber-based technique in their malware. And in 2024, we think that because of the first fiber-based technique was detected, so it drives them to switch to another fiber-based technique. And later the same year, the exception handling technique is also appear in the malware. And interestingly, that these two fiber-based techniques appear around the same time they were presented at Black Hat. So these talks were presented in Black Hat USA 2023 and Black Hat Asia 2024 by the same speaker, Daniel Jerry. And both are related to the use of fiber, and those are really great talks. So if you are interested in, we highly recommend you to check them out. And since the attacker traces the trend of fiber technique quite diligently, so who knows, maybe they are even attending Black Hat Asia this year and sitting among the audience to take notes. And here is the comparison table to compare fiber and thread. And the key differences between them are fiber rely on the application to switch the execution. So it makes less detectable, especially for some security products, they only track system thread. And threads are managed by the OS, so it's more visible for solutions to monitor. So we think that a malware might prefer using fiber in the future more often to evade the detection. So now let's take a look how this technique works in these malwares. So in version A, convert thread to fiber is used to convert the current thread into a fiber. and allows it to switch to other fibers. And then create fiber will create a new fiber within the same thread. So the malicious code is placed at fiber structure plus C4 in hex. And finally, switch to fiber switches execution to the new fiber and run the malicious code. And version B is another fiber-based technique. So FLS alloc register a fiber address callback function. So when this object is freed or deleted, and the callback function will be triggered and execute a malicious code inside. And version C, this technique leverage the exception handler. So when this exception is triggered and malicious code inside the custom handler function will be executed. And we also observe some anti-analysis techniques in list loaders. So in the upper sample, the technique is calling get module handle to retrieve the information from the current process. And later on, XOR with specific bytes to check if the entry point matches the expected target process or not. So if an analyst doesn't know this technique or running it directly by using DL32, and it might get failed. And the bottom sample and this technique requires the correct order to execute the export functions. Because this loader distributes its decryption and payload execution into different export functions. So if the running order of those export functions is wrong, or running this DL by using run DL32 to execute a specific export function, and analysts might get fail or get stuck. And now we have already covered the loader, and let's move on to the backdoors. And based on our hunting records, this client can be traced back to 2022, and it doesn't exist as a file. Instead, it's decompressed and executed in memory. And for network traffic, it supports two connection methods. And one is SSL with custom protocol, and the other one is using HTTPS. And here's the special thing is that the main functionalities actually depends on another extra plugin received from C2. So it makes analysis more difficult and harder to figure out the backdoor purpose directly. And now let's continue to discuss the network traffic. And here is an example to decrypt the traffic header. And as shown in the format here, the first 20 bytes are traffic header, including some information such as command code and two keys. One is for header decryption, and another one is for data. And also error code of backdoor commands and a victim hash to help them mark the targets. And after the header decryption and the data part actually share the same algorithm. And as shown here, here is an example of backdoor command 1004, and which is receive shellcode. And this backdoor actually provides two categories of command codes. And one is general and another one is plugin. So for general part, it's similar to other backdoors. So it can collect information from vector system and update its embedded configuration and control the command shell. And the plugin part, as what I just mentioned, this backdoor can receive another extra plugin from C2, so it allows on-demand functionality expansion. So the one we observe is a DLL with 3 export functions. And since we don't have complete traffic data to get the whole file, so the purpose of init and delete instance is based on our guess. So init here might mean that start the plugin and get instance means get the basic information about a target folder and send it back to C2. And delete instance will stop the plugin and do some cleanup stuff. And here is the table of Backdoor commands. And as what we introduced in the previous page, they can be divided into general and plugin-related commands. And the page shows the communication traffic with C2. So first, the victim sends its information to C2, and in response, the C2 will deliver the shellcode to the victim's environment in order to install a plugin. And once the installation is complete, and the victim will send relevant information to C2, and from then on, the C2 leverages the plugin to execute plugin-related commands until the plugin is uninstalled. And as shown in the figure on the right, we use a script to pass the traffic from one of our collected PCAP files to check the network flow. And the second backdoor we found is client, aka the second version of CS client. And it was first discovered in 2024, and it's the same as the first version. It doesn't drop any file and run itself in memory. And it has both client and server mode, depending on its configuration. And it also supports multiple connection methods. And for antivirus part, injecting into their host might be a technique to bypass AV products and disable EDR solutions. And for persistence, this backdoor actually provides 3 kinds of methods depending on the given arguments. So including running a scheduled task or creating a service. But if there is no argument given, and this backdoor won't set up any persistence. So for this backdoor, there are 3 main categories of backdoor commands. So for link part, provide the capability to choose the connection methods from 7 kinds, and alternate the backdoor mode between client and server. And for plugin part, the plugin manipulation is similar to the first version CS client, but only keep 2 export functions this time. And for session part, it injected a remote shell into their host. And in one of our observed behaviors, we saw the command executed under Windward. But in normal situation, Windward rarely executes CMD directly. So we believe this injection is a technique used to evade detection or escalate privileges. And here we found some similarities between these 2 backdoors. Both have a function that collects the victim's information to calculate a victim hash. And this if-else statement indicates 2 modes. One is for testing, and another one is for executing it directly in the victim's environment. So it's kind of similar like debugging mode and production mode. And the flag is in its embedded configuration to control which mode is enabled. And here is the comparison table between these 2 backdoors. So CS client does not only support more connection methods, but also equip more functionalities against AV solutions. And another tool is ScreenCap, which is a screen capture tool installed by client through a remote shell. So it will send the victim screenshots back to the C2, and it's adapted from an open source tool, and which can be found on this GitHub repository, Volva 616. And now let's move on to the attribution part. So for attribution, we believe this attacker might be Chinese speaking based on the file compilation time and command execution time. which are from C2 communication logs. And it shows that the time zone is GMT plus 8. And additionally, we check the TTPs and the target scope. We think that it's somewhat similar to another well-known attack group, Delbit, which was introduced by NLab. So let's wrap up our discussion for today. So first, Earth Ammit has started using fiber-based technique more often to bypass security products in their malwares. And at the same time, they are side of supply chain attack across 2 campaigns. So we need to keep long-term monitoring on their activities to understand their goal. And in campaign VENOM, they mainly use open source tools because they are cheaper and harder to check. And based on the attack result from the first wave, they use more customized tool in their to launch the second wave, which is campaign TIDRONE, to target more specific victims. And this shows their strategy that they start with the common tools to test the waters, then switch to more advanced tools to target victims more effectively. And in appendix, we provide IOCs related to these 2 campaigns for reference. And feel free to take any pictures if you want. And we will also provide this information to Black Hat Asia after the talk. And if you belong to the target scope, and please stay aware of those potential threats. And we also provide a comparison table between campaign VENOM and Delbit. And list down all the reference links. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or need further information, and welcome to reach out.
So is there any questions? So if there's no questions, you can still reach out to us. And thank you everyone, and enjoy Singapore.